Let's look at our item list. Now, I'm going to have you look at the item list in GP and the item list in BC. I want you to notice something. They pretty much look the same. You can send this entire list to Excel. You can do the same thing in BC. In BC, it so you would share and you can open in Excel or you can edit in Excel. You can share the teams and copy the link if it's an Excel document and that's it. You can also do Word, but it doesn't really look very clean. So when you open in Excel, this allows you just to manipulate the data. When you edit in Excel, you can manipulate the data and import that back into BC. That is something that GP does not allow. So one day we'll go over how you edit a document or edit your items and import them back in so you could do changes. For instance, I wouldn't necessarily do quantity changes. Let's say I wanted to update my cost. If I'm doing something, I would do that by doing edit in Excel. Or even if I wanted to change my descriptions, I could do that from Excel. I mean, there's so many ways you could do that. Same thing with your unit of measures. Let's just to say that notice your unit measures were set up for a series of items incorrectly. You wanted to do a mass update and change those. You can very well do that when you do an edit in Excel operation within BC. In GP, you would have to jump through a couple of hoops to do that. And what I mean by that, let's just go to one of these items in GP. So on the item maintenance card in GP, you can change your unit of measure schedule on the card itself. There's not a mass way to update the unit of measure schedule for items. Well, you would also have to make sure your unit of measure schedule ID matches your quantity decimal places. You don't necessarily have that issue within BC, which I think is a great thing. It makes it easier to operate and make on the fly changes. Now, again, you want to make sure if you make any changes like what I just described, you do that in a testing environment first, and then you can go and do it in your production environment. That keeps you from destroying data, and also it allows you to see what type of errors you will have if you were to do something like this. All right. Now, but I also want to let's go back to our setup card for both BC and GP. Something else I want you to notice. Notice how when I click on a particular window within BC, it shows up as an entire page. I can make that page smaller or I can shoot the page out to another window if I choose to. If you look to the top left, I can choose to open this in another window. That way I can go back and forth between my main window and the item card or I'm looking at posting setup right now or inventory setup. So I can look at both side by side if I wanted to. So with that being said, let's just go back here. All right. So I want you to also notice you have different ways you can set up your inventory here. So we can show more and show less. So we have things in BC that are called variants. A variant of an item is in BC is nothing that you can do in GP. If you wanted to have an item that is it's the same but different, you would have to do what's called a configuration. And that configuration, and that would have to be when you're using manufacturing. BC, you don't have to have manufacturing turned on or in use to use item variations. If you notice, I have here item under average cost calculation type, and don't pay attention to this, we're not going to discuss that today. But notice it has my item, my location, and my variant. In other words, a variation is, let's say I'm selling a base chair, and I want that chair can come in oak, it can come in, let's say plastic, so wood, plastic, and things of that nature. That's a variant of the same item. So same thing in GP, that is a configuration, and you can do that type of configuration in GP, but it's not called a variant. So you do have that option. If a variant exists, you can turn that on. So the other thing about BC I noticed is I can pretty much do whatever I want to do in my inventory control setup in GP. But in order for me to do the same thing in BC, I would have to turn on my edit so that I can do my operations here. So variant mandatory says if I'm going to sell a particular item, if there is a variation of that item, make sure you make that variant mandatory if it exists. So variant mandatory meaning if I'm going to sell this item, I have to make sure I sell a variation of that item because I might just have it set up as a chair in BC, but I want to sell a plastic chair versus a wood chair. So that's what that means.